sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Sometimes when I'm sitting there with my two buddies, me, myself, and I, you know, I try to think about things. And sometimes I think, it's good to remember, be thankful that we have the redemption that Christ died and gave us. But remember, we are still sinners. We still fall short. If we remember that, it gives us something to work for, continue to work for. If you would turn over 1 Corinthians. Look in the 9th chapter. One of the things, the main thing as a Christian that we should be striving for is to receive that crown at the end of our days. Striving for the crown. And Paul talks about it, a race in the 9th chapter of Corinthians. If you would look at verse 24. Do you not know that those who run a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore, I run thus. Not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I preach to others, I myself may be disqualified. We see here, he disciplined his body and he brings it in subjection. And that's something that I think that we as Christians could use if we think about it on a daily basis. We know we are sinners. All have fallen short. So we need to discipline ourselves, discipline our bodies, bring it in subjection. This is something that's personal. When you're at home with your two buddies, think about it and make sure that you're bringing yourself, you're controlling your body. That's one thing's for certain. We become Christians. That doesn't change the fact that we're going to face temptations on a daily basis. In order to prepare ourselves to face these temptations, it's going to help if we can bring our bodies under control and control our temptations. If you continue reading in chapter 10, Paul goes on and gives us some Old Testament examples. Look at chapter 10. Let's start in verse 1. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that our fathers was under the cloud, all passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of the spirit of the rock that followed them, And that rock was Christ. Let's pause for a minute. So we see here, he's give us an example of Israel when they was brought out of the land of Egypt. They was all saved in that cloud and passing through that sea. But as for an example, let's look at verse 5. But with most of them, God was not pleased, and their bodies was scattered in the wilderness. So at one point, they were saved under that cloud and through that sea. At this point, God was not pleased with them, and their bodies was scattered. Think about it. Think about that. Look at verse 6. Now these things became our example, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. So this is here for our learning. We know we are sinners. We know we got to get our bodies under control, our minds under control, and to resist temptation. We see an example here of ones that did not please God and was scattered. Their bodies were scattered over the wilderness. We know the story. But if you look through verses 7 through 10, we see some of the examples. Do not become idolaters in verse 7. Verse 8, do not commit sexual immorality. Verse 9, do not tempt Christ as some of them has also tempted and was destroyed by serpents. Verse 10, do not complain. We see in these few verses what they gave into. This is here for our learning. Look at the next verse. And when you're sitting there with your two buddies, think about this verse. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he falls. That's something for us to think about on a daily basis. Take heed. You may think you're doing really good. Think about it. You're a sinner. You need to fight temptation. You need to control your mind. You need to control your body. You need to take heed lest you fall, as these did in this example in the Old Testament. I got a couple of, I'm not sure on the timing of this, so I'll just talk. I got a couple of examples. You know, we mentioned how we as Christians are going to face temptations on a daily basis, one way or another. And we've talked about these things, how we should be mindful of that. One thing that we can know, we are going to be tempted. The question is, how are we going to react when we're tempted? In a good way or a not so good way. I got a couple of other examples I would like to look at, and this is nothing new, but I want to look thinking like this. I want to look at these two examples. One of them is David. If you would, turn to 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel 11. A little background. We know this is a familiar story. David was king. He had his armies off to war, and he stayed home. You look at verse 2 of that chapter. And then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked onto the roof of the king's house. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful to behold. And we'll just pause there. He walked up on the roof and he saw this woman. I don't think he went up on the roof on purpose looking for temptation, but he did go up on that roof and he saw this woman and he was faced with a temptation. That's plain and simple. And let's look at another example. We're going to be going back to this, so keep it marked. Look at Genesis 39. That's Exodus. I know. Genesis 39. Joseph. A little background. He was sold into slavery. Potiphar bought him, saw that God was with him, put him over all that he had. And then look at verse 39, verse 6 and 7. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and in appearance. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. And she said to him, lie with me. All right, we'll pause there for a second. We see at this point, Joseph was faced with a temptation. She was tempting him. Both of these men was faced with similar temptations. The question is, how did they react? If you look back in Samuel, look at verse 3. Samuel 11, verse 3. So he saw that woman. Verse 3, he sent and inquired, and someone said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So he dwelled on it, and he sent and inquired, asked about this woman. Then he was told, this is Uriah's wife. All right. What did he do at that point? Keep in mind, each time he could have turned away. He could have walked away. He found out it was Uriah's wife. What David do then? He sent a messenger and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, and she was cleansed of her impurity and sent back home, sent back to her house. And the woman conceived, so she sent and told David and said, I am with child. All right, let's back up a little bit. He walked up on that roof and he saw that woman. All he had to do was turn around and go back inside. He didn't. He sent and inquired about that woman because he dwelled on it. He found out this woman was Uriah's wife. All he had to do was say, and go back inside. But no, he sent and took her. And then we know the rest of the story. She was with child. So he spent verses 6 through 13 or so trying to cover that up. He sent for Uriah and tried to bring him back home and tried to get him to go to his house to cover up the sin, his sin. Uriah didn't do it. And he tried a couple of times, got him drunk. Uriah didn't go to his house. So what did he do? He sent a letter. He sent a letter to Joab, and he sent it by Uriah's hand. Take this letter to Joab. And he read it, and it said, put Uriah up front, pull back, and let him die, to cover up his sin. All he had to do was turn around and walk back inside. And we see what conspired after he failed to resist that temptation. Look back in Genesis and Joseph. His was a similar temptation. The woman came to him and tempted him. How did Joseph react? Verse 8, and he refused. And he said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in his house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? He refused. That's how he reacted to that temptation. But we see that she didn't let up. Look at verse 10. So it was that she spoke with Joseph day by day, and he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. She was continuous in her tempting him, and he was continuous in not heeding to her temptation. Finally, in verse 12, Joseph found, or actually verse 11, he found himself in the house to do his work. No man was there. And she came back, and look in verse 12, she caught him by the garment, saying, lie with me. But he left the garment in her hand, and he fled and ran outside. So how did Joseph react to the temptations? He refused, he did not heed her, and he fled. He ran away from his temptation. That's how he reacted. So we can compare the two on their temptations, and we can compare the two on how they reacted. David, he gave in to his temptation, and it led to sin, which led to more sin, which led to more sin. I mean, it just compounded. He gave into his sin, and he faced some consequences of that sin. His child died, and he lived with that. Even though he made things right, he lived with the consequence. He lived with knowing that he conceived a child and that child died. But I often wonder, How often in David's life did he think about Uriah going up to the front and then pulling back? I wonder what picture ran in his mind. That had to be horrifying for then on. He sent that letter, sent him up to the front, pulled everybody back, and they killed him. And David knew that the rest of his life. He was responsible for that the rest of his life. Joseph, he resisted. He didn't sin. Did he have consequences? Yes, he did. And we need to think on that, remember that as well. We need to resist temptation. We may have consequences when we resist. What happened? What happened to Joseph? You know, his wife, Potiphar's wife went, lied on him, and he got thrown into prison for not sinning because of the lie. So we need to understand our goal is to receive a crown of life. We're going to go through this life on a journey. We're going to face temptations, and we're going to have to make a choice to resist and sin not, or give in and sin, as these two fellows did. Joseph was in prison, and we need to keep this in mind because we need to keep this in mind because we're going to find ourselves in this position one day, someday, some shape or form. Look in verse, let me go back to Genesis. Look at 39. Look at verse 20, 39, verse 20. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. But look at verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. We need to remember that. He resisted temptation, and the Lord was with him. Even though he was thrown in prison, the Lord was with him and showed him mercy. And then he gained favor in the sight of the guard. But the key thing is the Lord was with him. That's something we need to remember when we face our temptations. The same exact thing is true for us today. So we need to keep that in mind. We have a choice to resist or give in. We're not for sure on the consequences we'll face for either. There will be consequences. If you give in to sin, the main consequence is death, spiritual death, if you continue in it. But there's also other consequences, and we need to keep that in mind. But we need to also keep in mind, if we resist temptations and sin not, God will be with us. There is a couple other, I think I have time. I'd like to look at a couple other examples in the New Testament. We talked about temptation. What happens when we find ourselves giving in to those temptations and find ourselves in sin? There's a couple of examples of two guys that found ourselves in this situation. Let me get to turn over to Luke. Luke 22. There's two guys. One of them's Judas, and one is Peter. We know that, and this is a familiar story too. It's nothing new. But we know that Judas was offered 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus, and he took it. Look at verse 22, verse 47. Let me back up a little bit. We know that he took this silver and he was going to betray Jesus with a kiss and turn him over. And verse 47, and while he was still speaking, a multitude. Now, Christ is in the garden. He'd been praying and with all the Peter and all the others. But he finds himself, while he was praying, still speaking, behold, a multitude. He who called Jesus, one of the 12, went before him and drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? So we see here, Judas betrayed him with a kiss. Now let's look at Peter. A little background, same setting, so as Judah. You know, we know that they took Jesus away, and we know, I like Matthew's account where it said everyone fled, and when they took Jesus away, he actually saw them leave. They left him, all the disciples. But let's look at 31. Let me back up here. 31. And the Lord said to Simon Peter, indeed, Satan has asked for you, and he may sift you like a wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. But he said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And I truly believe he meant it at this time. Then he said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny me 3 times that you know me. So we see here what led up to both of these guys. Judas betrayed him with a kiss. Peter said, I will not betray you. I will die for you. I will not betray you. But Christ said, before the crow 3 times, you will deny me. Let's look at verse 51. Let's see, 54 through 61. Having arrested Jesus, they led him and brought him into the high priest. But Peter followed at a distance. Now when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter said among them, then a servant girl, seeing him, sat by the fire and looked intently at him and said, this man also was with him. But he denied him, saying, woman, I do not know him. And after a little while, another man saw him and said, You also are of him. And Peter said, Man, I am not. And then after about an hour passed, another confidently affirmed, saying, Surely this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean. And Peter said, Man, I do not know what you are saying. Immediately, while he was speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at him, looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord and said, Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. I just imagined that look when he looked up and saw Jesus looking at him. And he knew he gave into his temptation and he sinned and betrayed Jesus. No doubt, no doubt he knew he sinned. He betrayed him. Look at Judas. What's the difference? Let me just ask, what's the difference? We always think about Judas so negatively. What's the difference in Peter and Judas at this point in time? They both betrayed Christ. They both sinned. We always think about Judas as because of his greed, and he sold Christ. The fact of the matter is, he betrayed Christ. Peter betrayed Christ. Plain and simple. How did they react? Let's look at Judas. Let's turn to Matthew this time. Matthew 27. Look at verse 3. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful. And he brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned and betrayed an innocent blood. And they said, What is that to us? You see to it. Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed. All right, let's stop for a second. He was sorry. He knew he had done wrong. He threw down the silver. He had a choice to make at this point: to repent and turn back to Christ, or something else. And he chose something else. He gave up and he went out and hanged himself. He could have easily turned back. But we see his reaction to sin is he gave up and he hanged himself. He ended it. How did Peter react? Let's go back to Luke. Luke 22. Look at verse 62. That rooster crowed, in 61. So Peter went out and wept bitterly. He was sorrowful. And he repented. And then shortly thereafter, he turned back, and shortly thereafter, we see him in Acts chapter 2 presenting the first gospel sermon. And 3,000 souls was saved. He could have made a choice and gave up. He did not. He gave into his temptation. He sinned and he returned. You know, we can find ourselves in like situations. We will face with temptation daily. We have a choice: resist or give in. If we give in, we'll find ourselves in sin. We still have a choice. We can turn back or give up. I want to go back to Genesis 39 and remind us but the Lord was with Joseph and he showed him mercy. That can be us. If we resist temptations, he'll be with us. And if we give in to sin and return to him, he will be with us. Let's see what. I want to go back to a verse 2. Back to Corinthians. See, that was in chapter 10. I'll get there. You know, we have to, as I said, resist temptations and strive not to sin. But one thing about it, look at verse 13, and we're going to close with this verse. No temptation has overtaken you except such as common to man. But God will be faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with temptations will also make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. That'll be our closing point. He's there with us. There is a way of escape. We just need to make sure we're looking. So I'll close with that. Well, we got a few minutes before class, but that's all I have. And I hope it's been helpful. And we'll go knock on the doors now.